So now we're at step 4 of the decision-making model. We've talked about 1, 2, and 3, and we made a point more recently to keep these two differentiated. So now, finally, after all this, we're at the point of now being able to choose among our options, make the actual decision, in other words, and plan, put the solution into, and plan the solution. Like, how are we going to put this into effect? So whatever you do to evaluate the solution, I mean, again, that decision-making method, that selection method, is something you should have figured out in step 2. But here you're basically trying to consider the pros and cons of each alternative to choose the best one. So whatever method that takes, just make sure you were clear on it in advance and try to use a good, reliable method for saying, okay, how do these options compare to each other? How do I know which one I want to choose? And that's challenging to do in and of itself. I mean, we don't know the full pros and cons of each option because we have limited information about the future and maybe limited information about the potential consequences of any choice anyway. So there's just certain realities that inhibit our ability to be fully rational here, but we want to do the best we can. And then once we choose a plan, choose an option and plan how we're going to implement it, well, then we actually implement it. So part of the decision-making model, steps 5 and 6, are actually post-decision. You've already made your decision. The idea here, the reason that those are built into the model is to say, well, thinking ahead to implementation should be an important part of what helps you choose an option at the given moment. You could choose really great ideas, but if you can't enact them, if there's no way for you to bring them to life, if you can't really bring a new product to market, as great of an idea as it might be, it may not be the best choice for right now. You want to choose things that you're going to be able to plan and implement. And that implementation of a good idea, let's assume it's a creative idea, is what essentially innovation is. Creativity is the process of generating divergent ideas and divergent thinking. Implementing those ideas is what real innovation is. And then finally, the last step, the evaluation of the solution, is don't just stop there. Once you put an idea into action, once you have implemented it, part of your decision-making process, another way to enhance optimization is to make sure that things are going according to plan. Have things change, have the situation change where you need to revisit or tweak or adjust the decision that you made. Monitoring the progress, the controlling function of management becomes really important here. Because part of the reason decisions don't work out isn't because you made a bad choice, but because the implementation goes awry. So if you're checking and controlling and evaluating, you minimize those problems and it increases the idea of your overall decision working out. So it's very important. So that walks us through all 6 steps of the model. So now I'd like to step back from the model and say a few things about rational decision making in general. But do keep in mind, like I've said, that there are different things that even if you buy into the validity of these steps, that there are biases that can creep in and make these steps very difficult to fully enact. And we've looked at some of them in these videos. There are more that we haven't looked at. There are some that are covered in your book. There's some that we'll look at elsewhere. But just know that you're in some ways fighting a bit of an uphill battle to try to be rational, because our default nature is not really rational. So we have to accept that we have biases. We have to accept that we have flaws in our thinking. I call them flaws, but I mean they're not really flaws. This is just how our minds work. And they're beneficial in some ways and they cause problems in other ways. So what do we do about these biases, these things that keep us from being purely objective in our thinking? We can't, in my mind, awareness is really what we can do. We can't stop these things from happening. We can't stop ourselves from stereotyping. We just do it. And there's a reason why we do it. It helps us order our environment. It's useful in some ways, but it's problematic in other ways. We have to just accept that we have these biases, be aware that they occur, understand how they operate, understand when they operate. Like maybe you're more likely to experience certain biases in certain kinds of situations. Like for example, in a situation on an issue that's really important to you, you're more likely to experience a confirmation bias. When judging people, especially people who are different from you, you're more likely to stereotype. What are the situations that trigger your biases? So notice when they occur, accept that they're there. And then in that, when you're aware of them, they don't blindly influence you anymore. You can say, okay, hey, I have an important decision to make. I know that I'm inclined to be biased in some ways. and I know something about some of the ways that I'm inclined to be biased. Can I set those biases aside for right now and try to act more objectively? Can you recognize when you're stereotyping somebody and say, hey, I'm stereotyping this person. I really don't know anything about them. I'm just mistakenly applying group characteristics to this individual. I'm not evaluating them fairly as a result. Can I put that stereotype aside? I can't stop it from happening, but I can not act on it. I can put it outside of my thinking for now and try to evaluate this person more objectively. So can you distance yourself from these biases in the moment for any one decision and realize that you may have to do this every time you're facing an important decision, but getting in the habit of learning how to say, okay, put biases aside, try to be more objective, use the rational model to help you be more objective. That's the whole point of it. That's key. As Mark Twain says, it ain't what you don't know that gets you, it's the things you know that ain't so. And so if you fail to be aware of your biases, you're falling into this trap of thinking you know something when really you don't. If you're aware of your biases, you avoid that problem. You don't fall into that ignorance trap. So we've spent a lot of time in these videos talking about how important it is to enact a process that helps you be rational. With the idea that being rational is desirable because it reduces the impact of bias and helps you be more fair, consistent, and objective. Now, and the reason we did that, we said, was because the goal is to optimize. So rationality is the key to optimization. And so that's kind of our ultimate goal, kind of the ideal situation. Choose the best possible alternative. The reality, however, is that we are not totally rational. And that's not bad, that's just how it is. We exist in a world that we would describe as bounded characterized by bounded rationality. This idea that there are limits to being fully rational just based on the realities of our day-to-day life and our minds. The limits to rationality include the biases that we've looked at and others, and there's other just basic limits to rationality that just exist as part of the way life works. So again, it's not that bounded rationality is bad, it's just to accept that we operate in a bounded a space that's bounded in its rationality. It's not fully, truly rational. Here's some assumptions of rationality that these assumptions would need to be met in order for us to have pure rationality in our thinking, in our thought process. And of course, you could see as you look at this that these things are not true. It's never true. I mean, when are we ever making an important decision where there are no time or cost constraints? When are we ever making a decision where preferences are always constant and stable? These things change. There's always time pressure. There's always some kind of urgency. We can't always anticipate the known possible consequences of any option. There's always unknowns. As this quote says, the ultimate dilemma faced by all decision makers is that no amount of sophistication is going to allay the fact that all of your knowledge is about the past and all of your decisions are about the future. So just because of the way time unfolds, there are limits to our rationality. We can't anticipate everything, no matter how hard we try. And so we can't be fully rational. We have to accept bounded rationality as the reality. So how do we therefore go ahead with real-life decision-making? I think my sense of it is that the rational decision-making process is important to understand because it's a tool to allow us to push for optimization despite the fact that full optimization may be tough to come by. It's a way to encourage us to try to be more rational rather than succumbing to our tendencies to be overly irrational. So bounded rationality is, by its very nature, fraught with limitations and biases. That's essentially what it means. And your book goes into some comparison between bounded rationality and rationality, which it's good to take a close look at. When we operate in this space, which is the space we're always in, we can never really truly optimize. There may always be some better solution out there that we could never have possibly anticipated or known about. We just don't know. Even when something works out really well, maybe there was something that would have been even better. We just can't ever know that for sure. We just want to push for optimization as much as we can. But we want to be careful that if we don't push for any level of optimization, if we don't attempt to be rational, if we don't try to make a sound decision in terms of the process that we enact, well, at its worst, we'll find ourselves satisficing. Satisficing is when we choose, you know, the first minimally acceptable option that comes to mind. And teams, in classes, people, we do this all the time. You know, what should I do? Who should we interview for as our manager? Well, I know somebody who works at, you know, Hollister at the mall. Great, let's do it. That's satisficing. It seems to be the first acceptable outcome. You choose it without really giving it much thought. You didn't really go through any process to determine if that was in fact a good option or if there could have been better options. You know, again, not that there could always be a better option, but maybe it's worth coming up with 4 or 5 options before choosing one. Maybe it's worth thinking through what you actually want a good option to be before you make a decision. Maybe it's good to make sure you really understand the core problem a little bit before you jump to a decision. Right? So satisficing kind of bypasses all phases of that model and just goes right to the solution, right to step 4. And we really want to avoid that. That's not the key to effective decision making. Sometimes it works out, but often it doesn't, and often it means we're settling. So my advice to you, the best I think we can really shoot for, is to try to use the rational decision making process to try to offset at least some limitations of the fact that our rationality is bounded. And try to pursue optimization to whatever extent you can. Yes, you're always going to have to settle to some degree because we can't ever know everything. But let's try to make it so that we've at least given ourselves a pretty good chance of reaching a more optimal solution than we would have had we just satisficed right from the get-go. So I think that's the key. That's how you can feel like you're making a good decision in the moment, even if you don't know what the outcome is going to be going forward.